Today's topic is the notorious submarine attack on USS Wasp, in which a single spread of 6 torpedoes from Japanese submarine I-19 resulted not only in the immediate destruction of that carrier in one task force, but also hits on 2 other ships, including Battleship North Carolina and a different carrier task force 8 minutes later. We say that's pretty lucky, and it was. Shortly after the war, in 1946, the legendary baseball executive Brach Rickey said, "Luck is the residue of design." Essentially, good luck is what's left after intelligence, planning, and skillful effort have combined to do their best. The I-19 skipper, Commander Takakazu Kinashi, was the most successful Japanese submarine commander of the war. On 15 September 1942, what factors combined to make his torpedo salvo the most effective and luckiest in the history of submarine warfare? Hi everyone, Rick Russell here. Stand by for channel markers. The Guadalcanal campaign began well enough for U.S. forces when on 7 August 1942, the 1st Marine Division landed and seized an incomplete airfield, which as Henderson Field became the focal point of the struggle for the island. Grasping the intent of American strategy immediately, Admiral Yamamoto moved quickly to drive the Marines from the island. For starters, he flooded the region with submarines. The vast majority of the Imperial Navy's operational ocean cruising and fleet-type submarines in the Pacific soon converged on the Eastern Solomons in the final months of 1942. But they were poorly managed, and 2 boats were sunk, and the others did little to slow the U.S. offensive until 31 August, when I-26 put a single torpedo into Saratoga. The big carrier's torpedoing, for the second time in less than 8 months, hurt, because only 1 week earlier, Enterprise, after being damaged in the Battle of Eastern Solomons, had withdrawn for repairs. When Saratoga followed the Big E to Pearl Harbor, only Wasp remained on station. Wasp was smaller and slower than the Navy's other frontline carriers. Her design process had been difficult because at the time the Navy was still learning about carriers and laboring under tonnage constraints imposed by the interwar naval treaties. As a result, she was commissioned with a variety of technical oddities, some good, such as the new deck edge elevator, the first of its kind, and some downright bad, such as bringing the aviation gasoline lines outside the hull. Even worse, when Wasp and her crew gamely steamed into the submarine-infested waters around Guadalcanal, and here's the unspoken part, they did so knowing their ship had no torpedo protection. Help was coming. Hornet, which had been cruising nearly non-stop since her commissioning at Norfolk in October 1941, had taken a much-needed break after the Battle of Midway in early June to repair, retrain, and reflect on her performance. As first Enterprise and then Saratoga limped to the rear, she joined Wasp. Unfortunately, Battleship South Dakota struck an uncharted coral reef while headed to Guadalcanal, damaged a 150-foot stretch of her hull, so she took a ticket and got into line for repairs at Pearl Harbor. Gaining any sort of edge in the air or at sea seemed impossible, and unfortunately, the situation was about to get a whole lot worse. On the ground, the 1st Marines still held, heroically, but only barely. On 14 September, as they gunned down the latest bayonet charge of the enemy's latest counterattack, help was approaching. 6 transports carrying the 7th Marine Regiment. With enemy carriers and battleships lurking north of the Santa Cruz Islands, U.S. Theater Commander Admiral Robert Gormley committed Task Force 18, built around Wasp, and Task Force 17, built around Hornet, with Battleship North Carolina escorting, to their protection. They operated together as Task Force 61.1, with Rear Admiral Lee Noyes in command, flying his flag in Wasp. Hoping to conceal the presence of the transports for as long as possible, they steamed in distant support, meaning out of sight of the transports and their screen. In Hornet's group, Ben Blee, who was a young officer serving in heavy cruiser Pensacola, noted, "Hardly a day had passed without sonar contacts, periscope sightings, or other evidence that enemy submarines were on the prowl." Tuesday, 15 September 1942, was a cloudless and perfect day for submarine operations. Visibility was high, and a fresh 20-knot southeast trade wind whipped up the waves, making periscope and torpedo wakes extremely hard to detect. On that fateful day, before it was shot down, a Japanese seaplane reported the approach of an American carrier task force 200 miles southeast of the southeastern tip of San Cristobal Island. A picket line of 9 submarines between San Cristobal and Santa Cruz was alerted to its presence. 2 boats, I-15 and I-19, were in position to intercept. At 12:50, I-19's hydrophones detected their approach. At 13:30, a destroyer left Wasp's screen to inspect the wreckage of the snooping seaplane shot down earlier. Along with the weather advantage, here's one instance of Lady Luck smiling on I-19's Captain Kinashi because the destroyer was absent on its inspection run when Wasp needed her most. At 13:50, I-19 went to periscope depth and spotted a carrier, a heavy cruiser, and several destroyers. She observed the carrier turn at 14:20, unwittingly placing herself in an ideal position to be attacked. Kinashi knew full well he would not have caught the carrier if it had not turned toward him. As destroyers raced to obtain new screening positions, Hornet's group turned too, conforming to the movements of Wasp, which was the duty carrier, and turning into the wind. Kinashi was oblivious to the other group's presence. While Japanese torpedoes were better than those of their American counterparts, their fire control systems were not, and I-19 needed to get closer to a target than American submariners did. After skillfully passing under the screen undetected at about 14:44, all times are approximate, Kinashi fired 6 torpedoes about 3 seconds apart. The range was some 1,500 yards. Between the choppy seas and the short range, lookouts spotted the torpedoes, too late for anyone to do anything. Of the 6 Type 95 torpedoes fired, the second, third, and fourth slammed into Wasp, which with her externally mounted fuel lines filled for flight operations and no torpedo protection, convulsed with a terrific shock and was shortly turned into a flaming wreck. I-19's first torpedo missed astern, while the fifth and sixth missed ahead. Some 6 miles away, in Task Force 17, Wasp was seen smoking heavily. When a plane went over the side, observers believed some sort of aircraft mishap had occurred. 5 minutes later, at about 14:50, one of the destroyers screening Wasp, Lansdowne DD-486, which was positioned between the 2 carriers, reported by TBS, talk between ships. Torpedo passed directly under 86, meaning Lansdowne itself, coming directly for force. Followed by, torpedo passed astern, headed for you. Voice radio is far from reliable, with words garbled or often failing to be received. In Pensacola, where Blee was officer of the deck, he wondered, "Who's you?" You was North Carolina. Some 6 to 7 minutes after the attack on Wasp, the Lieutenant Junior Grade, who was officer of the deck in North Carolina, saw Hornet make a sharp swing right. Tasked with matching the carrier's course, he ordered right standard rudder to keep station on a course parallel to the carrier's. The battleship was making 19 knots. In the final seconds, destroyer Mustin on the battleship's port bow, about 1,200 yards away, sent a torpedo warning by signal flag. At 14:51, the critical moments had arrived for destroyer O'Brien and battleship North Carolina. On the bridge of the battleship, O'Brien, which was also in Hornet's screen, was seen to turn sharply to starboard. That was I-19's torpedo number 5 missing astern of the destroyer. But she was immediately hit in the bow by I-19's torpedo number 6. A great plume of white spray engulfed O'Brien. With her bow shattered, she slowly withdrew, but would never recover. Despite valiant efforts by the crew to save their ship, O'Brien sank in the rear area in October. On board North Carolina, Captain Fort burst onto the bridge, ordering right full rudder, emergency flank speed, after which an impossibly long 90 seconds elapsed. With the ship just beginning to lean into the turn, at 14:52, I-19's first torpedo, fired some 8 minutes earlier, slammed into North Carolina's port side, detonating on impact at frame 46, slightly forward of turret number 1, about 2 feet below the lower edge of the armor belt, causing a sharp cracking noise. An enormous column of oil and water rose approximately to the height of the stacks. The geyser washed one man overboard. An unnerving flash of flame was reported in the turret number 1 handling room, and yellowish-brown smoke filled every open compartment between frames 37 and 71. But there was no fire. The smoke soon cleared, and the threat passed. General quarters was sounded immediately, and North Carolina's excellent engineering department increased speed to 25 knots, despite the jagged edges of a 32 by 18-foot hole protruding from the hull and acting as a brake. Flooding, although extending inboard of the holding bulkhead and above the third deck, was not extensive, and counter-flooding corrected a 5.5-degree port list in 6 minutes. Turret 1 remained apparently operable. There was no machinery damage, and shock effects were not severe. Unless you were one of the 5 men killed, loss of life, the ship reported, was small. The ship stuck with Hornet for 5 hours, then withdrew. She too returned to Pearl Harbor for permanent repairs, as well as a much-needed overhaul and a significant upgunning, but missed the rest of the Guadalcanal campaign, including the Battle of Santa Cruz, when Hornet was sunk. After Wasp was hit, destroyers found and attacked I-19 with depth charges, sending the boat deep. It was I-15 that confirmed the sinking of a U.S. carrier with Japanese naval headquarters. Only 8 weeks later, I-15 was lost with all hands. I-19 survived until November 1943. Kinashi was killed in action in 1944. Both I-15 and I-19 figured in early post-war accounts of the attack, with some historians believing that, given the time elapsed between shooting and hitting, and especially the great range to target, only a second submarine, namely I-15, could have attacked North Carolina. But when historians finally came to appreciate the superior technical capabilities of Japanese torpedoes, which in the Type 95's case had a range of 6.5 nautical miles at 45 knots, and Ben Blee located Japanese veterans of I-19's attack on Wasp, men who had transferred off the boat before it was sunk, could the story of the luckiest torpedo salvo in history be properly understood. Luck is a fact, but should not be a factor, Brach Rickey said. That was the case on 15 September 1942, when a skilled submarine commander, focused on executing the attack at hand, succeeded in sinking a carrier. He was in fact incredibly lucky that 2 of the 3 torpedoes that missed the carrier found other targets. But Kinashi died not knowing how lucky he had been. Veterans of his crew only started to put 2 and 2 together in the mid-1960s. Ben Blee finally sorted it all out only in the 1980s. That's all for this channel marker. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment or recommend another subject below. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.